And welcome, hola. And this is the video I'm making to show my students how to install SQL Server and Management Studio for the October beginning of my latest data analysis class sections, starting with SQL Server. And of course, anybody else that wants a nice little video about it. It'll take about 30 to 40 minutes to do the video, I think. I show you a couple of things beyond just the pure installation, just to verify that things are going to work and how to operate with the services. So what are we going to cover? Let's see. We're going to cover downloading our source materials and installers, right? You got to have the downloads. You got to have the product. Installation of them. Again, not shocking, right? And how to turn the services or the service off and on. SQL Server runs as a service. It sits behind the scenes and runs all the time. I want to make sure you understand if that gets turned off, how to turn it back on again. And you might actually want to run it and turned off on your main computer. You don't want it interrupting your video games and stuff like that. It shouldn't. It doesn't take very much power, but you might as well know how to turn it off and on and where it is in the computer to do that. So we'll do that. And then we also got to test our installation. Why? Because you always test your installation. You want to make sure that when it got installed, that it actually worked. Because if it didn't, you need to do something else. You need to fix it, right? So we're going to test it as well. And that'll be it. And then a little status report on the channel. And then bye-bye. Adios. Okay. So that's what we're covering. I am running a virtual machine to make this happen. Here she is right here. So this is basically just Windows 10 running in a virtual machine. I decided not to do it on Windows 11 just because there's so little difference between Windows 10 and Windows 11 in this type of video. There's no benefit in doing it in Windows 11. There really isn't. So fine. We're just going to do it in Windows 10. So our first mission. Where do we go get this? That's easy stuff, thank goodness. So here we have SQL Server download. So this is basically just the download page at Microsoft. I'm going to go ahead and click on my little tab there, and I'll show you how I went and got this. So I just type in SQL Server downloads in Google. And then because I'm in Mexico, I'm going to go ahead and put English. If I don't, then it'll send me to the download page for Spanish for Mexico. And I want to keep this English. I don't want to be doing bilingual videos if I can help it. If I do a Spanish one, I would just do a Spanish one. I'm not going to do them both in the same video. So anyway, SQL Server downloads English. That'll lock it down to English. And here she is right here. As you can see, I previously tested it to make sure it would work. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And that'll take you to the page we just saw. So if I scroll down a little bit on this page, go away. If I scroll down a little bit on this page, you're going to get to or download a free specialized edition. And you have two choices, either Developer or Express. For our install, we are going to download Developer, okay? Developer is free. It has all the features of SQL Server. I don't think there's anything missing. I might be having a space, but I don't believe it has anything missing. Bottom line, though, is it is made specifically for use as a test server, as a development server, and of course, for learning on. So you can't run this production. You can't run your website off of it. You can't use this in your bicycle factory to manage bicycle factory stuff. You can't use this in your restaurant to manage ingredients, but you can learn on it all day long, and it's free. So Microsoft's done really good work at trying to make SQL Server simple for you. Now, I'm sticking with the Windows version. I am not going to do a thing for installing on Linux. I might eventually. I certainly could. I might eventually, but since most of the people in my classes are running Windows, I'm sticking with Windows. I don't do a Mac one because, as you can see, there is not an installer for Mac. Basically, to run it on a Mac, you need to use Docker or some other solution to do that. That's more work than I want to get into, especially since I don't have a Mac right now that I can do it on. So on that, I can't run a video for you on that. But for Windows, we're doing that right now. So we go ahead and download Developer, and what will happen is once you have completed that task is you'll have this little file right here, SQL 2019 SSCI Developer. I'm not doing 2022 because 2022 is still in preview mode, so it's pointless. I don't like to do betas in classes if I can help it. I know I had to do that on Power BI, but I prefer not to do that with anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this little installer. User account control will pop up because this thing actually does need admin rights to install. Click yes. And you will see this dialog pop up. So you've got three choices here as well. The one you want to choose for what we're doing is basic. Basic is the simplest of all the installs. It doesn't ask you too many questions, and it just gets right to business. Custom, if you do know what you're doing already and you know that you have specific needs or things that you need to set up, you can use custom to modify it. And of course, you can just download the setup files directly. In this case, I'm just going to click on basic because that's exactly what we need. So click basic, please. As usual, read your EULA, your licensing terms. You know I have to tell you that. Legally, I feel uncomfortable if I don't tell you. You need to read that. So click accept once you've read it. Like I said, this doesn't ask you very many questions, so you have the option to change the install location. I generally would not recommend doing that unless you have some specific need to do it. Also, notice that you need to have about 9 gigabytes of free space. You better have more than that because you're probably going to want to do something with this little server as well. But just to get it installed, it needs to have about 9 gigabytes of space. And the download that it's going to have to do is going to be just over 1.4 gigabytes. So it's not a small amount of download. Obviously, that could take a while. I'm going to go ahead and click install. And it'll start my downloads, and then I can talk to you for a little bit. So, yeah, SQL Server doesn't require too much relative to hardware for a developer to use. Obviously, if you're running this in production, it's going to require more depending on your need, possibly a lot more. But for production or for developer use, it's not too heavy on the requirements. So just be aware any modern platform should be able to deal with it just fine. But I'll leave that one to you. In the end, it does kind of depend on what you're doing. Let me get a drink of water here. It does kind of depend on what you're doing. If you're doing machine learning or you're doing humongous amounts of data science or analysis where you have ginormous data sets and things like that, over 50 to 150,000 rows, maybe things like that, where you're doing millions of rows, whatever. Yeah, of course, it's going to need more power. But for what we're doing in classes and for what you'd be doing if you're doing my SQL tutorial that I'll be doing here on YouTube here pretty soon. I've finally got all my work cleared out of the way so I can start doing that finally. But yeah, if you're doing that kind of thing, it should, you'll be fine. I can't imagine there'd be much relative to modern stuff that you could buy that would be problematic. Intel or AMD is irrelevant anymore. Back in the old days, AMD I usually frowned on because Microsoft did not, for lack of better, work very well with AMD. They had bugs in SQL Server and AMD processors, but that was a long time ago. Nowadays, fine. Threadripper Pro, Ryzen, or Epic, any of the major lines that AMD makes is perfectly fine. They all work just great. And SQL Server does effectively do multi-core stuff, so it'll work fine. As far as the Intel stuff goes, any Intel processor that you get that's modern, as long as it has multi-cores, even an i3 with 4 or 6 cores or something, it'd probably be fine. I don't recommend i3s. The only reason why is just because you're probably doing other things besides SQL Server, and there can be some benefit to have a little faster or a little more powerful processor, but it works fine. Basically, for developer work, SQL Server is pretty chill on its requirements. Memory-wise, I would never go less than 8 gigabytes on a SQL Server machine. Honestly, I would prefer that you do at least 16. And the reason why is Windows is not exactly known for being sip when it comes to power or memory anyway. So wouldn't hurt to have a little extra, but I've certainly run it even on virtual machines on 4 gigs. That's really pushing it though. I mean, like your performance is probably going to be pretty sad. So 8 gig minimum, 16 gig would be what I would recommend. If you can do more than that, you may or may not need it. Depends on your workflow again, right? But the more rows that you're having to work with, as soon as you start getting over that 100,000 row mark, it can start liking memory a lot. And when you start getting into the 1,000,000+ rows, then having 32 gigs of RAM could be really useful. So I'll leave that one to you. RAM is pretty cheap nowadays, though, so there's nothing, usually people aren't going to complain too much about having some extra RAM, but I would never go less than 8 gig on this for sure. Okay, looks good. We have our server at MS SQL Server. That is the default name for SQL Server. I'm just going to real quick write this down here. The default instance is MS SQL Server. There must always be a default instance. Always. So just FYI. And that name, when you click basic, is set for you. You notice it didn't ask you, right? You can actually change that if you do other things, but in our case, we're just going to leave it alone. MSQL Server is the one that you want. Here's the name of the computer, Galactica. This virtual machine is called Galactica. I don't believe you. All right, look, Windows key and type name. View your PC name. Galactica, right there. So that is the name of this virtual machine. It is the name of the SQL Server. And then the SQL Server's instance is MSQL SQL Server. So it looks like this. The server is named Galactica in my case. Obviously, your mileage will vary. Instance is named MS SQL Server. Together, they look like this. Galactica / MS SQL Server. Now, here's the good thing. Generally, you're not going to have to worry about this too much as a beginner. You want to know it. You want to know what it is. But normally, when you're a beginner with SQL Server and you're not running a whole bunch of different machines and things like that, this should be pretty much, nothing's ever really a no-brainer, but it's about as close to a no-brainer as it's going to get. So I'm just writing that down for you so you've got it there. Anyway, you don't need to worry about any of this stuff over here, not for what we're doing. And now we need to install something to run and play around with and run our queries and do things like that. Because right now, the server exists. However, even though the server exists, we have no way to manipulate the server. We have no way to add data. We have no way to query data, etc. With that, that's what SSMS is. Install SSMS. So to do that, we can just click on this little button here. It'll open this up in your web browser. And it takes you to this web page. And it's pretty self-explanatory. Download SQL Server Management Studio. Nothing particularly shocking. If I scroll down a little bit, here's the link right there where my mouse is wiggling. And don't do the preview version. Do this one. This is the proper install that you're looking for. It's 18.12.1. And I've, again, already downloaded this. So I'm going to go ahead and close this install. Close. Are you sure you want to exit? Yes, because I've installed it. Here is the pre-downloaded file that you will get when you click on that link. It's Ssms Setup, English, United States. Double click. Because I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to do like Spanish. And I thought at one time maybe do a Spanish tutorial at the same time, but I could just see people pulling their hair out as I switch between two different languages. It's hard enough to do things without having someone bouncing between languages on you. So if I do a Spanish one, I'll do it in Spanish, and not be bouncing between that and English. So anyway, here we are. Click user account control. Yes, again, because you need to have admin rights. The install for this is pretty easy. This is about a 660 megabyte download, be aware, I think, if I'm correct. So go ahead and click install. You don't need to change anything, so just click install, and that's it. It'll take a little bit of time to do the install, and you'll be squared. So it'll take a little bit. The installer for this can sometimes hang for a little bit. So if it does, it's okay. So if you see it just sit there for a little while, that actually might not be broken. I know that sounds weird, but I've installed this on many different types of hardware. And I've noticed that on some hardware at some speeds, it can basically just sit there for a couple minutes before it does anything once in a while. And it's done it sometimes in a couple different places. But it seems to be, I don't know. I don't really have an answer. There doesn't seem to be any unified reason why it does. It doesn't seem to be related to process or anything like that. So who knows? It's doing something, but I don't know what. The other thing is that it is Microsoft, and they are famous for not making their progress bars properly implemented. What they'll do is they'll do stuff, well, like you're seeing right there, where it's installing another product, but they're not, for lack of better, they're not incrementing their progress bar to show you that progress is being made properly. They could do it, but I understand it's more work, and I get that. It's not that big a deal. I'm just one of those, I'm an Apple kind of guy, so I like things to be very clear to the user. It's one of the things that they really drill into you at Apple is that, when stuff's going on, you want your customer to know that it's going on. You don't have to tell them exactly what's happening, but you should be at least showing them that something's happening, right? Because you know how customers are. You know how people are. If they don't see anything moving on that screen, if they don't see the progress bar moving, if there ain't no little dialy wiggly thing telling you that the computer's working, it's like, what's it doing? And people start pushing buttons, right? And I've had people actually break themselves out of their installer pushing buttons, thinking that it was dead, but it wasn't dead. Yeah, so there we go. So it doesn't take too long. So here we have a restart required. No problem. Just click on restart. And it shouldn't take too long. You'll have to reboot. It can't do this. Some people will actually try and get away with this by doing a log out and a log back on. You really shouldn't do that. When something tells you to restart, you probably ought to restart. I do realize that sometimes you can snake your way out of it by doing the log off and log on thing. I know you can because I've done it myself. But when it tells you to restart, just restart. Especially on a desktop platform where you're not doing server-based stuff. You should never be in a situation where you can't restart your desktop. If you are, that's indicative of another problem somewhere else, usually. Not always, but usually. Anyway, here we are back at our login screen. Let's go ahead and log in real quick for you. And again, my throat's dry today for whatever reason. All righty. So now we need to test our server. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you our I get that. We'll just go ahead and test it and call it good on that one. Sorry, I had a little brain lock there for a second. So first thing we want to test is the service working? First test. Is the SQL Server service working? Windows key, plus then type SERV. Okay. So Windows key. Listen, you. SERV. See right here where it says Services app? Press enter or click that with the mouse, and that will bring up this. Scroll down, as long as it's in alphabetical order. Scroll down until you find SQL Server. There she is right there. SQL Server, MSQL Server. Remember the instance name? That's the instance. So the host name is Galactica. The instance name is MS SQL Server. So there she is right there. Is it running? Status, running. So yes, it is running. So let me write that down. Run services. In fact, here, just to modify this here, every once in a while, I'm going to change things up just to make it a little clearer, okay? So run services. And I'll give you a little example of how you would do that. Then scroll down to SQL Server and look for MS SQL Server. Probably that, you're going to have to insert. If you have a different one and just double check. Verify it says, or its status is running. Okay. Now, just to show you one more thing, if you double click this, see where that says startup type automatic right there? Automatic means it restarts every time the machine restarts. Okay. So every time this machine reboots or boots, it will start this service. Don't worry about the delayed start. SQL Server doesn't need to be what's called delayed start. Automatic is fine. Manual does exactly what it sounds like. It will not start the next time you run the machine. So give me a second. Check automatic or manual. Automatic means it runs every time the machine reboots. Now, if you stop it, it will not start itself again until you reboot, all right? It isn't going to manually, it will not restart from crash, nor will it restart after you turned it off or stopped it, is how they call that. Okay, so if you go in there and you stop the service, see that right there where it says stop? If you stop the service, it's not going to restart until you reboot or until you hit start again, okay? The reason you might want to do this at some point is you might want to turn it to manual so it isn't taking up clock cycles on your machine. It isn't doing anything if you're not using SQL Server. So on my home machine, like this machine, the one that the virtual machine's running on, my desktop here, I normally don't run SQL Server all the time. There's no need. I'm not doing SQL stuff all the time. Why take up time if I don't need to? Why take up time on my machine? What if I'm running Time Spy? What if I'm trying to get some hot graphical benchmarks, man? I'm going for the world record. I don't want SQL Server taking up time. So I'll leave it to you, though. If you're working on a laptop or a desktop or a whatever that is for work, or you're not playing video games a lot or things like that, if you're not doing a lot of stuff with like Photoshop, or maybe you're working with Premiere, you get where I'm going. If you're not doing anything other than Office applications and browsing the web and watching YouTube and stuff, there probably isn't much need to stop the server all the time. However, if you got an older machine or you got a machine that's a little slower, being able to turn that off has its moments. In this case, obviously, we're about to test the service, so we're not going to turn it off now, are we? So go ahead and click cancel. If you were following along, you want to always be in the habit of clicking cancel, not okay. We didn't change anything here, did we? When you don't change stuff, click cancel. But I'm going to note that too. If You didn't change anything. Click cancel. Not okay. Por favor. Please. And the reason why is simple. If you click OK, that will commit any changes that you made. And if the programmer in the back end screwed up and changed something and you didn't know it, or worse, as has happened to me, because I am definitely Mr. Wiggly Hand sometimes, you hit your mouse wheel and that changed some setting. You didn't realize it changed it, and now you've clicked OK, it set the setting. So cancel will save you. It saves me, and having instructed for many, many years, I assure you that it's very, very frustrating when you're trying to show students something and you accidentally made a change that you didn't realize. Bad, Jim, bad. Okay, so we want to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, so that's our first test. We verified that the service is running, okay? Second test. Run SSMS and then execute a query. Okay, so let's do that. So we can go ahead and close our services thing. How do you run Management Studio, Jim? Okay, that's not too hard either. Go ahead and press your Windows key. That will bring up our start menu here again, right? And as you can see, right under recently added, you will see your Management Studio right there. If you don't see it under recently added, we can find it by typing SQL. By typing SQL, all things being equal, you should see at the top here, Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio 18. Go ahead and click this or hit the Enter key. So let me go over here. Windows key again, plus SQL, plus type out SQL, and that should show SSMS as the first app listed. If not, it should be right near the top anyway. Again, I try and teach my students good habits. So what I'm trying to do is teach you to not waste time digging around in folders if you can help it. We want to try and change that paradigm to where we're using the tools that the operating system gives us to find things if we can. I know that Microsoft isn't exactly well known for being perfect in this one. I get that, but it does work for what we're doing, okay? But why go hunt around for Management Studio somewhere in some folder when we can just type in Windows key SQL and they'll take it right to it. Now, once Management Studio runs, we need to do one thing, and that is to set a link down here, a little desktop shortcut. So I'm just going to right click on this and pin to taskbar. So I can just pin, I pinned this to the taskbar now so that I don't have to go look for it again, right? Nothing shocking. I'm sure you probably already know what this is, but I always like to pin it to taskbar. So let me go over here. Once it runs, maybe pin to taskbar as well. Right click icon. Here, I'll do that. I'm just, as a teacher, it's one of those things. You don't want to assume that someone knows how to do something. So right click the icon in the taskbar, then select or click pin to taskbar from the context menu. Okay. So here we have Management Studio. It gives us our connect to server dialog. There's nothing much to do here. As long as everything was installed properly, you should see database engine. That's good. You should see the name of your machine, Galactica. You should see that you're using Windows authentication. Now, if this is blank, if you see nothing here, that might mean that the service isn't running. After connect box comes up, if the server name is blank, that might indicate that the service is not running. Go check that first. Because that's almost always what it is. When I was teaching this, where I had actual students in classroom, not virtually and not in Zoom, we would run into out of 15 students in a class, just about every time we got together, at least one machine would not start the service when it booted. The machines that we were on at that time, though, were kind of slow. So for whatever reason, Windows was missing the message to start the service. It's no biggie. You just got to go manually start it. Remember that services screen I showed you? So it's not hard to fix. But this can happen. There's a variety of reasons. No biggie. So looks like everything's working here. Click on Connect. And you should see this pop up over here. So as we can see, let me scooch this over. So here we have Object Explorer. This is how we see that we are connected to the database system. Galactica, that's the name of the server that this is on. So it's telling me that. The version of the SQL Server that it is on. So we can actually connect to different versions of SQL Server. In this case, this is what we just installed. And it shows you who you are. I am Galactica Jim Parshall. So that's the name of my computer in this case, and my name for the user. Now be aware, if you're working at work and they have a thing called Active Directory, this would be your domain name, not your machine name, probably. So just FYI. But since I'm on my local machine, technically my local virtual machine here, it's Galactica. But at a work environment where you're connected to a thing called Active Directory, it might show your domain, not your actual machine name. Nothing shocking. That's normal. Okay, we're ready. Click New Query right here. And you'll get your query window. Get ready. We're going to run our first query. This is so exciting. I get so excited. Okay, so here we're going to run our first query. So the first thing we're going to check is we want to check to make sure that the server is working. We want to run a query against it just to verify that, it'll listen to us and it'll answer a query. So we're going to say select, which is basically give me stuff. Give me what I ask for, okay? So we're going to select the version, and that's done by typing @ version. Not the Star Wars @ walkers, okay? The AT-ATs. No. This is @ version. That's telling you that it's a globally available variable. So @ just means it's globally available. So as you can imagine, @ version is something that Microsoft made for us so that we can ask the SQL Server, yo, what's your version? Who are you? What software are you running? That's what that means. So we don't even have to do anything else. I'm not even going to do a properly done. I'm just going to, this is as basic as it gets. So go ahead and click execute or hit F5. And all things being equal, it should immediately return with your versioning. Yay. And as we can see, we got 2019 released to manufacturing. We have our actual build number. We have what type of build it is. This is a 64-bit build, an x64 build. It's not ARM. Here we have the date of the build that was distributed and our copyright information. But then it also shows us that we're under Developer Edition 64-bit on a Windows operating system. If it was on Linux, it would actually say Developer Edition 64-bit on Linux as an example. Or if it's an ARM platform, it wouldn't say x64, it would say ARM, A-R-M. So your mileage may actually vary depending on what you got, but this is a pretty stock looking thing here. So give me a second. Let me go over here. The query we run will be select @ version. This will select, for lack of better, show us or return, however you want to call it, whatever analogy you want to use. It's not technically print, just FYI, just select is not print, okay? There is actually a print command, so you want to make sure you understand it's two different things. This is basically saying, show me this or return to me this. And at version is just a global variable that has the version information in it. Okay, that's all it is. To run the query, click on New Query up in the toolbar, like we just did, right? In the window that opens, type, select at version, and then press F5 or click execute. Either will work. Either is fine. It doesn't matter which way you do it. The F5 just makes it a little easier, that's all. Your result should be presented in the results window below the query window where you typed. Okay. And I'm going to move this down one. And also, just because I'm kind of a stickler for stuff like this, I'm just going to make some asterisks here just to set off this little section where you're actually running the query. It just makes it a little bit easier after you're telling you what we're doing. Here's the actual instructions on running the query. So let's make it a little simpler. All right, looks good. Assuming that everything worked, you've now verified that you're installed. You verified your tools ran. You verified your server is running and the service itself is running. And you verified that it responded to a query. So assuming that all that worked and you see a query there, your mission has been accomplished. You have installed SQL Server and the tool to work with it. And at this point, you are ready to do your own exploration and do some work and have some fun, because data should be fun. On how you could ever make data boring. Okay, there's days when it's boring. Believe me, I know. I live in Mexico, tequila, chilaquiles, there's a lot of the reasons why data might be boring now and again. But you know what? It's normally a lot of fun. Data is actually really fun. So we're ready to go. Now, a couple of things, just sundry items. I am going to go ahead and close my Management Studio. I don't need to save this query or nothing. And I'm going to go ahead and shut my virtual machine down. And let me talk to you for just a second. So you're seeing here my normal, at this point, the install video is pretty much done. So if you don't need anything more, you don't want to listen to the background metagame stuff, feel free to exit. Please like, share, and subscribe. The usual YouTube thing. We got to do that, right? Us YouTubers, we got to do the, like, share, subscribe, smash that like button. You got to do that, right? And then my Patreon, now that I am going to start, finally, I've cleared up my work enough. So my Patreon will also have a link down there if you want to Patreon me. $1 a month is all I ask. If you can, I haven't even decided on any benefits other than if you do help me with my Patreon, I will make sure that you get credit in the video. I will probably do the Strife Hayes thing, where I will literally just put the people that are helping me with the Patreon. I will basically have a screen at the end of the video that has the call outs for everybody. Obviously, at first it will be very big font, but as time goes by, it'll keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I like how Strife Hayes does it, where he just puts everybody on one screen and it gets to be this font. I think it's funny. So you also noticed, hopefully, that I was making some notes when we were going through this with some instructions. So I think another thing I'm going to do the same thing on my videos that I do from my classes. I am going to save this file after we get off here, and I will host it in my Dropbox. I have a permanent Dropbox account. So I think what I'll do is I'll host it in my Dropbox, in a public Dropbox for you. And that way you can go get this. I can't host the install stuff because that's a violation of Microsoft's licensing. So I can't do that. What I might do, however, is I will not only have this in my Dropbox, but I will also have the links. So I'll just drag the links, the bookmarks basically, into that Dropbox folder also. So that link will also be in the description down below. All right. So I'll do that though after we get off here, but that way you'll have this. I know it's not very much stuff, but somebody might want to read through this, and there's some instructions on there too. So I'll make sure, but that link will be in the description, okay, to the Dropbox. And I'll try and do that on every video I make where you have anything like this. I really like this style when I do presenting. It works really well, and it kind of saves the students from having to worry about making a whole ton of notes. I type fast enough that I can kind of make notes as we go along, and it also helps me to keep my brain squared. So I'll share that with you too. And I do believe that is it. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you watching my video, and I hope that not only did you enjoy it, but that you also got something useful out of it. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you later.